Hi, my name is JW, and I'm talking to you about forensicating like a boss. Very quickly about myself, um, I've gone full cyber. Uh, I know that you shouldn't go full cyber, but unfortunately, I did go full cyber. I have been a hacker, a developer, an admin, a security analyst, and so forth. Actually, in my previous life, I actually worked with Niklas doing red teaming and being basically the guy who did the social manipulation and phishing. I've done also incident response and forensicating as both a consultant as well as now in my current role. I don't like to dwell too much on myself, but what you should know about me is this basically describes my ethos. Watch me fail at stuff, and then let me explain how you should avoid those mistakes, how you could do things better, even just marginally better than I have done, just so that I could prevent one catastrophe from happening in the future. I'm willing to put myself up for ridicule, and that actually is a quite nice segue from Niklas's last slide. I've done that previously as I was getting the OSCP certification, and I did fail quite hard on that at first. But for today, I'm not here to talk about myself. In general, this is the agenda for today. I will describe the context I'm coming from, what sort of pains I'm experiencing in my context, and what the solution is that I propose. So let's go on with context. I currently work for the Finnish government. I work as a government official in the National Cybersecurity Center of Finland, which is basically we work as the governing body for different things, domains, and so forth. But for me, I'm focusing on this. I work for the CERT team, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team, as in when things happen, when cyber hits the fan, with critical infrastructure, with companies, organizations of different sizes, small businesses, citizens. Effectively, the whole of Finland is our client. When cyber hits the fan, they can call us and we will try to help them. And all of our services are effectively free of charge. They are already being paid by taxpayers and other revenues from governmental and public sector funds. So when you call us or email us, you're not paying a dime directly at the time of your crisis. But we don't want to take away from security consultancy companies like, for example, Niklas's company or others like Nixo and 2NS that are supporting HelSec. So we're not sending anyone on site to do incident response. That's for consultancies or the organizations themselves. We help via email and phone sometimes, and all communications with us is strictly confidential. So if you tell us about something that happened to you, we are not going to be telling any other government officials. It's confidential. We will help you get through your problem. And today I'm talking to you about DFIR. And it's a fairly common term in InfoSec, but I want to break it down so that we're talking about the same things. What DFIR means is digital forensics and incident response. And even though this term is usually used as a single thing that happens, digital forensics and incident response are two overlapping but distinct skill sets and functions. They help and complement each other. Both are usually needed when cyber hits the fan, but it's good to understand where I'm coming from. Digital forensics is about investigating digital evidence, whereas incident response is about getting back to normal. usually getting back to some sort of operational state and then getting back to normal as quickly and as safely as possible. Digital forensics is about logs, network traffic, mass media, different types of memory dumps, mobile forensics, and all sorts of funky hardware that you can use to analyze what has happened, why this has happened, and so forth. Detect, for example, who has done what. But incident response is about computers, humans, processes, and communication. For example, let's say a city or a very large organization or a hospital gets hit by ransomware. It's not an IT issue. There might be quite heavy stakes on the line, and it's more about, okay, how do we get food to the people who actually are in our care? How do we make sure that medicine is applied to the right patients? Those are not IT issues, those are human and process issues. And incident response is quite holistic. You need communications. You might need HR. If things are shutting down for an extended period of time, people might have to go out of work or stay at home or whatever. So incident response is about getting back to normal and avoiding more damage. So what's the pain here? Well, the pain starts, or the problem starts, whenever an incident starts. That's when someone hits the panic button as they recognize that something is out of the ordinary. Whether it's an extreme case like ransomware having encrypted everything, or something simple like, hey, there's a new administrator in our administrator group. Whatever the case, things start happening quite fast. And incident response is quite an hectic, chaotic, time pressured situation. If you make mistakes, or when you make mistakes, there are certain things that might escalate if you don't have your whole tools and processes in order. So when that cyber hits the fan, let's go do some forensicating. And so this is where you start as a digital forensicator or an incident responder. You get some evidence and now you need to start processing it. And this is the first pain. You install your tools or are updating your tools, or recognize that, hey, maybe your tools that you have installed several years ago suddenly don't work with the evidence you are now processing. And this state of digital forensic tooling is, to be very simple about it, problematic. I'm not trying to rip on any specific tool. This is widespread enough that I have had issues with multiple different tools in the forensic field, both open source and as well very, very highly priced tools. Here are some examples of, okay, well, maybe your installation is just broken. Just do a fresh install. Well, I did do that during the last 12 months or so. I did do that quite a few times. And on every single time, I had different kinds of pains with dependencies and things not working out of the box, straight out of GitHub or straight out of package management. And here's an example. 2.5 years ago, someone is explaining that, hey, the specific memory compression of this memory dump is not supported by recall out of the box. And the advice is you should go and download that manually and install it by hand instead of having that built into the dependencies. And this is still a problem because last August, for example, that snappy compression that's mentioned here actually became default in that specific tool. And I had to fight with this problem this year. So you're there installing your tools, and then finally, several days later, you get to incident response, check number 1, tools work. Okay, now you need to actually start doing the actual finding evidence, solving the case, and so forth. So you open up your recall, your volatility, your sleuth kit, your end case, or whatever it may be. And then you start working on your actual process. And hopefully you remember take some logs from that process. Then one shift later, of course, as the hero of DFIR you're done. Tools work, you find the evidence, you solve the case, you can go grab that cold one and watch some new HelSec. Then an eternity later, for example, next week, someone returns to you and says, hey, we're a bit concerned about some of these results. Could you explain how did you come up with these ideas? Like, we're seeing that you're indicating that this Google IP address or this police IP address is an actual attacker. Could you explain how did you figure this out? And you're like, sure, I have my evidence and I have my results. And then you realize, how the fuck did I get from A to B? And then you realize that that virtual machine or whatever you have been using for that actual processing, you've closed it. And all of those evidence have been lost in your bash history, but you had several terminals open. So every bash history is overwritten, or you had that simple logging command somewhere that was saving your logs, but you notice that it's one arrow or angle bracket instead of 2. So you've been always just overwriting your logs instead of appending, or whatever the reason may be. And you're like, oh shit, I need to explain how am I saying that these are the IOCs, or these are the reasons why I know that there's no backdoors. So you need to go back and redo your work. Or you need to go there and say that, I don't know, could be fairy dust, I don't know. So the long and short of it, pain number 1 in DFIR is tooling. Pain number 2 is lacking information on how you got from A to Z. So as a good talker, I of course am presenting you with a solution on how to fix these pains. And my suggestion for these is using open source tooling, namely CinCan and Minion. And probably some of you have heard CinCan talks at HelSec at the actual physical events, but given how limited those have been in physical space, probably some of you have not heard of this. So I will explain. CinCan, which can be found at cincan.io, is an EU-funded project that's jointly been developed by our guys at NCSFI, YMV, and University of Oulu. And what it is, it's basically Dockerized, up-to-date tooling. And the main benefit of this is there's no dependency hell. Of course, once you get actually CinCan running on Python specific version and so forth, but once you get that tooling up, all of these tools that are Dockerized, you don't need to worry about. You can have that Python 2 tool right next to that Python 3 point whatever tool, next to whatever PHP tool. And you get a fresh environment every run, meaning there's no chance that an old case you were working on that shared computer is in any way tampering or tainting your current analysis environment. And here's a list from CinCan's tool site of all of the tools that currently are available as Dockerized tools in CinCan. And I would like to point out a few of my favorites. Of course, this depends on what sort of digital forensics you're doing. APK tool is an excellent tool on Android malware analysis or APK analysis, and CinCan has good workshops and recordings, I believe, of how to use APK tool for that specific thing. Ola tools is great for Office documents, and then volatility is my favorite for memory forensics. And just to note here, CinCan has also Dockerized volatility 3, which is amazingly fast nowadays. And then there's Minion, which is basically an offshoot tool that was developed during CinCan's birth during these past few years. What Minion does is it effectively works as a make script, a build script, a bash script on Ansible playbook, that sort of theme that we're going for. So it's a premeditated workflow. Incident response is hard enough as is, with people's livelihoods, sometimes worse, sometimes lives on the line. Criminals might be active. There might be an active adversary in your case. So it's already hard enough without having to worry about the tooling and what steps you should take and which nooks and crannies you should be looking at. All of those corner cases in specific Windows places and so forth, or specific files on Linux and so forth. All of these you can premeditate and create offline when everything's not yet on fire. And the other really great point about Minion is effectively it saves all of your processing steps. So you never lose that data, those middle steps of how I got from A to B to Z. Here's an example of a Minion rule. Very, very simple, naive version of a Minion rule file. So basically you have the default rule of in, which stands for whatever input file you're giving Minion. So it could be your memory dump, or it could be your zip file, PDF file, or whatever directory. So you do your heavy processing on it, and then you do multiple next steps. And all of these things will actually run in parallel, so you get quite nice performance benefits of it, and then you can combine all of those together. And what you don't see from the slide is no matter how much you change those next steps, if you don't change that single line of heavy processing, then that heavy processing doesn't need to be rerun. If the rule has changed, then it's executed. Whatever you put inside the rule, if you change lines, if you change echoes, if you change formatting parameters, whatever, that changes the actual rule content, then it's executed. But if everything stays in place inside the rule, it's not executed because you already have the cached result. So what it means that you don't need to rerun heavy workloads. So if you have that 8 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte, 64 gigabyte memory dump, or that 300 gigabyte disk image you're working on, and you run volatility or whatever sleuth kit on it, and it takes several hours, and you grab that output from it, that output is stored and is ready to be processed by your next steps. You can add those next steps as you're going through it, but that first step won't be needing to be rerun because it stayed as is. And a very nice consequence of this deterministic behavior is the reverse. If nothing has been executed when you invoke Minion, this means that these are exactly the droid commands you are looking for, meaning that when someone asks you, how did you come up with this specific IP as being an indicator of hostile activity? Or how did you determine that there was no evidence for backdoors, or whatever the actual question is? You are able to use the Minion playbook to just show that these are the steps I took. And actually, as a bonus tip, Minion already includes a subcommand called explain. And you can just say Minion explain this file, this output file, and it will show you all the steps it took to actually generate that. So in short, CinCan and Minion are guaranteed to relieve pain, because they take away opportunities for me and for you to screw up, to misplace those log files, to misplace your bash history and so forth. It takes away or saves time from that future you that needs to go back digging. It saves time because you don't need to rerun those heavy commands, and you can just reprocess that output. And one of the core things is that I can plan and share my DFIR playbook, whether it's with colleagues, whether it's with actual proper police investigators, whether it's with some external auditor that wants to audit that I have done a proper job, or whether it's as open source because sharing is caring. And there was this really nice talk about the GitHubification of InfoSec that I recommend you look up. And on that note, the last time I gave this presentation was at CinCan's final seminar as the project is closing the EU-funded portion. I was talking that there are certain very scrappy Minion rules that I have been putting together for certain investigations I was doing, and that I was giving that presentation to get some sort of public pressure to actually release the stuff open source. And now that HelSec accepted me to talk here, I couldn't let that slide. So I pushed, and now I have published those Minion rules on our GitHub, on our very brand new GitHub. It's a very basic workflow. It's a version 1, minimum viable product, your mileage may vary, and so forth. It's documented. There are actual comments there, and it at least gives some sort of structure on how you would go about doing this sort of forensicating. And if you don't understand why those steps are there, then it's a good place to actually Google and search for why these are important steps, or why I would be caring about these steps. And as an added benefit in that rulebook, it actually generates a markdown report on that workflow. So you can just watch on that GitHub page and see what sort of output I get from a very simple 2 GB Windows machine that I specifically set up for this sample. So it's out there. Go have a look. Pull requests are accepted. Give comments, and I hope that this will help, for example, schools or wannabes who want to join InfoSec on perhaps learning about DFIR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. John Wick. So we have a questions for you. Surprise, surprise. The first one is about the CERT FI, the Traficom NCSC FI. Would you help some Dopikauppa 3.0 under attack without passing a word to police?
Yes.
As you said that you are not sharing information to other authorities. Yes.
Talking to us and communicating us with is strictly confidential.
All right. So you would help Dopikauppa 3.0. All right, cool. How can we as professionals, hobbyists, and regular citizens help CERT FI in helping us and others?
We already are in quite a really privileged situation here in Finland and at CERT FI, given that we have massive trust. We are a fairly small operation, and we already have the trust of the people. That's why we operate in strict confidentiality, that we want to keep that trust. And the easiest way to help us help others is reporting things. On our site, whether you go via ncsc.fi or in Finnish kyberturvallisuuskeskus.fi, you can report incidents, or you can send them via email to us, that whether you're seeing phishing, whether you're seeing like new sort of scam or malware being sent in your organization, or all sorts of these things, help us build a proper situational picture of what's happening in Finland. And also, we very, very actively go for these sites. We abuse them. We use different contact methods of actually contacting other nations and their country certs or the actual hosting providers that this site is actually hosting phishing or other malware. And those are quite often quite quickly taken down. And when someone is having a good day and they spot that phishing, and if you let us know and we're able to take that offline, then you might be helping some other citizen who doesn't have that good day or isn't savvy enough to notice the difference between a phishing site and a proper site. And so you will be preventing identity theft or other crimes.
All right. So basically, you're suggesting people to stay vigilant.
Yes, and just letting us know and let us take care of abusing or taking down those abusive sites.
Yeah. All right. Next question. What was your biggest mistake that never happened? Something that nearly was, but for some reason did not become a nightmare reality.
That's an interesting question because I tend to discard those memories where I almost failed and more focus on those things that actually failed. But I'm sure that many times I have almost, well, maybe database admin stuff. Once I have been bitten enough times about destroying production data in my early years, I actually started using proper transactions and then reviewing the data after the transaction before committing it, and then having the wits to actually roll back data. And probably those cases where I had someone sitting next to me and I'm just reading off the screen, this is what is happening, and they're able to spot that, hey, did you mean to do this? And those sorts of review of intent cases.
Alrighty then. There will be a few more questions for you on the Discord. So if you have time to answer them, it would be really cool. Next, we will have a talk by Ivan about the SharePoint RCE he found a few months ago. This talk was actually supposed to be a month ago in our HelSec first meetup, but Microsoft didn't release the patches fast enough, so we had to postpone the talk, and now we are getting it. So stay tuned for a few minutes.